Alex, the week has come to an end, almost to an end. You know what? After the
Mercifully.
show, I'm just gonna stop. I'm just gonna
Yeah,
turn it all off and walk away.
that seems like the right way to approach this. I mean, yeah, sure, there's like 7 more hours of the workday, but who gives a shit?
Exactly. It's Friday.
Yeah,
As soon as Unprofessional Friday starts on the West Coast, I kind of consider my day over.
yeah. There's not. I mean, it's not like there's really much else to do on the site at that point.
If they're on the couch drinking beer, then I should be on the couch drinking beer, even if I'm not streaming that out to an audience.
See, this is the bummer thing for me though, is that starts at like 6:30 my time. So yeah, the workday kind of has already wound down at that point, so I don't get that extra little,
Yeah,
bonus time.
that's true. That's true.
My life is a nightmare. How are you doing?
Well, aren't all ours are.
Yeah.
It's been good. It's been good. I'm getting prepared for GDC, so I've been doing less on the site this week. Although I still managed to write 2 reviews.
Yeah, you did.
For Danganronpa and another for Yoshi's New Island, which we'll get to in a little bit. But yeah, it's been preparing for GDC, which is weird because usually I'm in San Francisco for GDC. Now I'm in Chicago for GDC, and just trying to get my schedule in place, and then figuring out what the wider site wants to do. Because I'm going after a bunch of interviews that don't really make sense for video, or they're maybe part of like larger stories that
Right.
I'm working on for the future. So I'm setting all that stuff up to happen during the day, and then also working with the guys in San Francisco for our night shows, of which there should be a couple, which I'm
Now,
excited about.
are there any names or anything you can say out loud now, or would you prefer to keep all that
No,
a
no,
secret?
I'll probably wait. I'll probably
All
wait. I've
right,
gotten a lot of tentative, yeah, I'm in. We're still figuring out scheduling and things like that, but
makes sense.
as with most Giant Bomb things, you will see a lot of familiar faces, but I am excited. I guess I could say one of them. I could say that it looks like we're going to have Jim Crawford, who is the developer of Frog Fractions,
Awesome.
on one of the nights, and that's if you haven't seen, there is a Kickstarter for Frog Fractions 2
Yep.
going on right now, and part of the genius of that Kickstarter is that the backers aren't going to know when the game is out.
Right.
If you stumble upon or discover the game, he'll send you a code or reimburse you for having purchased it, but he wants it to be a secret even to backers, which is unbelievable.
That is super weird and kind of awesome.
I really love it. And if you go and do a couple of searches, it sounds like there are, like, in the Kickstarter video, there are some numbers that lead to websites about bread, which then have prime numbers in the source code,
Oh
which
no.
then leads you to other websites. So, like, the trail has already begun, and the game's not coming out for 18 months.
Oh man. If this is just going to be like an elaborate breadcrumb trail that just carries through the entire development process of that game, that is terrific.
I don't think that's possible. That's a lot for one person to sustain, but who knows? I don't.
But
Maybe.
man, let him try, because that would be awesome.
Yeah, maybe we can get a better sense of what all of that means at GDC.
What if
Interview-
Frog Fractions 2 is already done? What if that game is already finished and this is all just an elaborate ruse?
Yeah, maybe we're playing Frog Fractions 2 right now.
Yeah. It's an ARG.
I don't know what that game is going to be. I'm excited to see how he follows it up, given the fact that he's announcing that he's making it.
Right.
Part of the beauty of Frog Fractions was just sending a link to someone and being like, hey, you should play this. So
Yeah.
the fact that he's announcing, I'm making Frog Fractions 2, even though, of course, he's saying it's not going to be called Frog Fractions 2, it'll be called something else. He's just calling it Frog Fractions 2 for the purposes of marketing this Kickstarter. I mean, it's great, because it really sounds like the entire Kickstarter is, look, give me this money so I can pay my rent and my basic needs for 18 months, and then you'll end up with a weird thing at the end of it, that's simple.
I mean, that's the spirit of, crowdfunded video games in general, is the notion that, you are paying me to live my life for the next several months while I work on this thing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
so,
and
he's doing that.
it's going to be curious how Frog Fractions 2 works out, simply because trying to follow up on, like, the game wasn't a one-trick pony, but it was a game of tricks for sure.
Right.
And Candy Box, I don't think worked at all it's the second time around. It did not hold the same luster, and just making the same thing but weirder and bigger didn't work at all, at least for me. And Frog Fractions faces a similar dilemma, but it seems like the designer Jim Crawford is going about it in a bit of a smarter way so far, by intentionally keeping a ton of mystery so that you're not quite sure where it's going.
Yeah, yeah, and if nothing else, that thing was. I don't even know what I was gonna say. I was basically saying I am very excited for more Frog Fractions. I thought that game was really neat, and the rabbit hole that game tumbled down. The more you played it, the cooler it got. So I trust that guy to do something interesting, creative with the sequel. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, yeah. You know what? I don't thinking of it as a sequel is probably the wrong way to think about it.
Yeah,
He is
there's
making
another game that will have the title Frog Fractions, but it might not have anything to do with what you played the first time around.
and it probably won't have the title Frog Fractions.
Yeah, fair enough.
So anyway, so that's I ended up booking that yesterday for one of our nightly shows. So I'm
Cool.
excited to have Jim amongst many others who we are talking to now and figuring out people's busy night schedules. But we should have some really cool stuff, and I'm excited to see what goes down. I want to try and see if we can get me versus Chris Remo playing Spelunky, but that is something I have not explored, but I'll say it out loud so that
Yeah.
I will actually.
So basically,
go
the
explore
challenge has been laid down like in public, so he has to respond at this point.
it. Yeah. We mentioned it on Twitter. We thought it would be fun. I just forgot about it until right now, but I think that would be fun to try and do on one of the nights. So we'll see if we can make that happen. What have you been playing this week?
Let's see. Well, as far as like just current video games have been going, really the only thing I've been playing is Titanfall. On and off since Tuesday once it launched. On and off only really because I've had a hard time lining up schedules with friends to play, so I've mostly been playing public matches, and that is the goddamn worst.
Mm-hmm.
For the exact reasons that any multiplayer shooter is kind of the worst once a million people start playing it. Like within 5 minutes of my first match on Tuesday, someone was talking about ramming his cock in me, and then over chat, and then I got teabagged, and I was like, you know what? This is why I don't play multiplayer shooters. This is every reason I don't play multiplayer shooters distilled into a 10-minute period.
Right.
And it just kind of kept on like that. Like I eventually turned chat off because I just don't want to listen to what anyone there has to say. But people playing multiplayer shooters is the worst thing about multiplayer shooters, which I realize is sort of a conundrum, but that is the thing that always turns me off of playing those games. And if you don't have people that are dedicated to playing with you that you know and trust to not be complete dickheads, it's not a lot of fun. Titanfall is a very fun game, but it has the same problem that I have with every other multiplayer game, which is people. So that has been corralling me from playing a little bit lately.
How fun is it when you're just jumping into the, obviously people are dicks, you're turning off the voice chat, but when you're in the public matches and you're just kind of the lone wolf.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm. No, I see what you're doing there. I'm not going to respond.
Is it fun?
Yes, it is. The game is, I think, a lot of fun. There are a couple of modes I could give or take. Like, if I never play another Capture the Flag match in any game ever, I will be totally okay with that. But the basic attrition and Last Titan Standing and hardpoint capture modes are all really fun. Once you take the voices and the stupidity out of the equation, the gameplay shines through. It's still really good time. Not the sort of thing I want to play for really long stretches, because I feel like because it is kind of a thin game in terms of modes and features, you could burn out on that game real fast. There are people I've already seen that have, gotten whatever the badge is once you reach the level cap 2 or 3 times over, and I just do not understand how that is a thing you would want to do by this point in the game's lifespan, because I would be so bored with it by this point.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to be curious to see how the DLC is rolled out for that game, in terms of what they address, what they add to the game. I'm also super curious to see how they handle the sequel. I know that it's maybe early to be talking about it, but probably not. We are going to get a Titanfall 2. I am sure of that.
Yeah.
And you know what? I wonder what shape that game is. I have to imagine they have to be considering doing an actual single-player campaign, unless this game is such a wild success that they kind of stick to their guns on that and then just pad out the multiplayer end of it and just put more and more into that.
Yeah.
But you know, it's gonna be interesting to see how they address that in the run up to a sequel, and then also what they put into a season pass. Because like from what you've played, like would you just want more, like more maps, or like how
Yeah.
what would you want?
Well, I mean, I don't think I'd want much more out of the campaign because the campaign is kind of useless. I mean, I understand what they're going for. They're trying to, craft a little bit of a story around, just standard multiplayer. But the story they're crafting feels totally superfluous and doesn't mean anything. Like, it just gives you this weird framing device for the rest of the multiplayer of why these two factions are fighting, but it doesn't even do a particularly great job of that.
Hmm.
So if they're going to add more, yeah, I guess it would just be more of the multiplayer stuff, more maybe a couple new modes, some more maps, definitely some newer weapons because the guns I've unlocked most of the pilot guns, and the weaponry for the Titans is more interesting, I think. But the guns, when you're just running around as a pilot, apart from the smart pistol, which I think is neat, but I kind of got over using it after like the first few hours,
Hmm.
are pretty dull. Like there's one gun that I like that works, and I never really want to touch any of the other ones. And only when I get those burn cards that give you like amped versions of other guns do I ever mess with them. And it's sort of like, yeah, these are cool, but I can just keep using this SMG, and I'm doing pretty well with it, so I don't really see the point. The weapon selection is not very creative, which I'm a little bit surprised by.
Yeah, I mean, I think that definitely seems to be sort of the general impression of the game is that it's an excellent, iterative, polished
Yeah,
take on a concept that a lot of these developers were already familiar with, and that they have done some interesting things to remix it and to change it up. The mechs, are a huge part of that. But in terms of being like a modern warfare style, like reshaping of the genre, like doesn't seem like that. But you can't expect a developer to do that
right.
every single time. Some developers only have that kind of impact once, and to have the kind of impact that Modern Warfare did even just once is pretty astounding. And so I'm definitely curious to see where they take that for the rest of this game and leading up to the second game. And also, if they decide to do the second game, you know, do they do it in 1 year? Like, do they try and do a 1 year turnaround so that they can have it on PlayStation 4 and Xbox One and the PC, and then probably drop the last gen consoles at that point? Or do they give it a full 2 years and then come around for that?
In an ideal scenario, they're supporting this game with DLC for like close to a year, and
Yeah,
then they're putting out a sequel after that, the
right.
year after that. But I don't know. I don't know what their deal is with EA. I don't know like what kind of like sequel contract they have, like what the timetables are for any of that stuff. So I honestly have no idea.
Yeah.
But I'm with you. I would definitely hope they would wait a little while before making a second one because I feel like a year after year Titanfall dosage would be a little bit fatal because that is not a franchise that needs like a million games in it to be interesting. It just needs to kind of build on what it has and take its time because again, that is a game that I could totally see myself burning out on really fast if I just kept playing it for hours on end. I don't think I could last very long with it in that circumstance.
Yeah, I haven't touched it at all yet. I've wanted to, but I've been like I've said in the past, I try and focus on two games at once, so that I think a lot of people, especially in our line of work, have a tendency because you get access to a lot of games, you sort of just dabble in a bunch and never finish any of them. And so
Yeah.
I really try and focus, and I only really play two games at once. So even though I've had that copy of freaking Dark Souls 2, I've only played 90 minutes of it because
Right.
as soon as I picked it up, I was like, oh no, you can't just casually play Dark Souls 2. Like, I really need to put all of my interest into Dark Souls 2, and I
Yep.
was still in the middle of South Park. So I closed the Dark Souls 2, and then I finished South Park last night. I texted you last night
Yep.
and figure out where I was at, and I was about an hour away from the finish line. And
Which means
yeah,
that by the time I texted you back, you were probably almost done.
yeah, pretty much, pretty
Okay.
much. Yeah, I finished it out last night. I still might go through and do some of. I think I have at least one or two side quests that I can still do. It seems like you can still do them after you finish the
Yes, you
game,
can.
right? Okay.
Yeah.
Um, I saved it after the credits rolled and it pulled your character up again, where you could still walk around. So I might finish that stuff up. And there's also, that little bit for DLC. Although it seemed like, so when I turned on my copy of South Park, which is on Steam, and it popped up one time when I was playing the game, like, hey, you have the blah 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 DLC pack, which was just a bunch of like starter weapons that were like level 2 and 3 that would only be useful very early. I wonder if all the DLC is just going to be weapon packs and armor packs. I hope not.
Well, yeah, and it wouldn't make a lot of sense to put out any like high level, like gear content for that game, because it's not like there's more quests for you to do. Like they need to add some story content in order for any of that equipment to make sense. The stuff you're talking about, I'm pretty sure was pre-order bonus.
Oh, okay.
That was like there was a code for that in the 360 copy I got for my girlfriend, and I didn't even see that stuff when I was playing it on the PC originally.
So maybe the pre-order stuff eventually just unlocked for everyone at some point and stopped being a pre-order bonus or something like that.
That's my theory. So did you end up enjoying the South Park as much as I did, or
yeah, and I got to say some of the surprises they have in store for people who are familiar with the series regarding certain characters, especially in that last area where
mm-hmm. Yeah, it goes to some weird places at the very end there.
It does go to some really weird places at the end there. Yeah, that last major area before the final boss, my wife was shaking her head the entire time.
Yeah.
I could not really blame her. I was like, yeah.
It's the right response. It's the right response.
Yeah. But generally speaking, even like taking away all the South Park stuff, I liked some of the non-combat ways that you could interact with the world in South Park. Like it had nothing to do with the humor or the characters or anything. Just your ability to kind of get around the environment, like mess around with enemies ahead of actually getting in combat with them. The more that they added ways for you to do that, the less satisfying it became, I thought, because they didn't really effectively use a lot of them as it went forward. It was more just like, well, at the end, we're going to give you this fourth power, and then here's like 2 ways to use it before the game is over. Whereas it would have been, I think it would have been just fine to have like half the amount of both powers on both sides that you can pull up with the right bumper and the left bumper, and just use those in more creative ways. But generally speaking, the idea of giving the player a lot of things to do outside of combat, especially towards the end of the game, if you're playing on normal and you're, speccing in any sort of, and by speccing I mean like adding like the buffs to the weapon attributes and things like that. If you figure out the combat about a third into the game, and then it's just a matter of like figuring out how to cast bleeding and gross out on enemies throughout the rest of the game, and just waiting for them to basically kill themselves. So when that happens, and if you don't bump it up to hard, then if combat is less interesting but still fun, I like the environmental stuff quite a bit. It really added a fun dynamic to just exploring the world.
Yeah, it has some of the best like just weird exploration mechanics I've encountered in a game like that in a while. Like the whole thing with that game was that it was going to live and die by how much you wanted to be in its version of South Park, how much you wanted to poke around and find stuff and do stuff, and that is a game that I think is incredibly successful at, one, making it really easy to get around, and two, just being jam-packed with weird, dumb, hidden stuff to find kind of everywhere. Like, there are only a couple of buildings, I think, that don't have anything in them at all, and even if it is just like a dumb one-off gag like we were talking about on Monday, like, the guy fucking the horse or whatever, like, at least there's something there, and it's not often that you go through and you don't discover something. Like, even just the junk that you pick up, like, there's so many weird little tiny hidden references into that stuff that it all felt very worthwhile to dig around and find everything.
Yeah, I thought that was actually a pretty unique way to handle like a way of feeding you small amounts of currency, because the game, you never at any point have to grind in that game.
No.
Like, if you are just playing the required battles plus the like handful that you'll run into while walking around the map, like, you will hit the level cap like maybe 30 minutes before the game finishes. Like, pretty smoothly, like, you will run into that level cap, which is level 15, and you're going to be perfectly fine and suited for for finishing the game and any of the side bosses that come up.
Yep.
But yeah, like the junk is a way of feeding you currency so that you don't have to grind really in order to get money because the enemies drop a lot of junk. But the fact that like there's lots of unique junk that is a one-off, it's not even a joke, it's just a reference.
Yeah.
That if you're not a huge South Park fan, it's not going to mean anything to you, but also why are you playing this game? And if you are a South Park fan or have watched the show, even if you aren't a fan, if you just have seen the show, you pick up lots of really like funny references in each of those pieces of junk that I think is just a really effective use of a crappy RPG trope that is there for balancing purposes, and they just managed to squeeze in something there that makes it worth looking at every time you're looking through a pile of trash.
Yeah, and at the same time, I had a point there that I was going to make. I can't remember all of a sudden, but I was just going to say it makes it so that the script doesn't have to be jam packed with those references. Like you can put that stuff off to the side and let people go like point at stuff and go, oh, I remember that. I remember Cartman's mom's dildo and all that stuff, without having to make the script itself just a million long references to things that already happened in the show. That's the thing that tends to bog down game adaptations of shows like that, is the need to sort of like placate the audience by showing things that they remember versus like actually writing something kind of original around what you're supposed to be doing. And I think South Park manages to balance that stuff really well by mostly taking all that referential shit and kind of putting it off to the side where people can just easily find it without ruining the script with it.
Yeah, and by the end of it, I would love to see those guys make another game. I don't know how they can make another South Park game. It's hard to imagine them. They seem like they use every trick in the book and every reference in the book in this game.
Yeah.
I'd love to see if they had any interest in doing something original. I think that would be if Matt Stone and Trey Parker decided they wanted to return to games for any reason. Although reading the interviews, it sounds like this was exhausting and maybe it was just part of their one-off exploration of other mediums before they just kind of go back to what they're comfortable to. But if they did, I would kind of hope it was not South Park and something completely original. Plus also just they seem to have exhausted everything by the end of it. I just don't know how you would make another game set in South Park. I mean, maybe they could, and those guys are certainly creative enough to probably pull it off and surprise me, but it really felt like this was the South Park game that needed to be made or they wanted to make, and they closed the book on it in a pretty satisfying fashion by the end of it.
Yeah, I don't need them to make another game just like this. I'd rather that they... I mean, I don't know. I might just be totally making this up in my own head, but I feel like I remember them saying that they're not going to be doing the South Park show for too much longer. Like, they probably don't have a shit ton more seasons of that in them, so I don't know. Maybe once they're done with that, they could actually just, put that effort toward trying to create an original game project if they really wanted to. That would be interesting to me. I agree.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to seeing if there's any DLC. I have to imagine, considering all the cut material, that I'm hoping there's going to be some side areas. Here's a question. You don't have to answer this truthfully because it might be slightly of a spoiler. But so when you finally go into the Lost Forest in the Stick of Truth, which is a bunch of BS, is there like a solution to that, or is it just wandering and then you just happen to find your way out?
I never found that solution if it existed. Okay. Other than the one place that you have to go through the Lost Forest to get to. I never really found any other use for it, and if there is one, I haven't discovered it. Maybe someone way more insane than I am will take the time to try and figure it out and see if there is something, but all I ever found was a lot of random enemies to fight. Wandering around there is how my character got dire AIDS, which doesn't go away.
Yeah, I got that in Canada.
Yeah, so...
yes, once you are afflicted... once you contract dire AIDS, it is a permanent health detriment that plays out each turn. A very a small amount. It's not gonna kill you, but there's no, as far as I know, no way to get rid of that.
Yeah, I couldn't find one to get rid of it. So that was sort of my moment where I was like, all right, you know what? I don't really want to wander around here anymore. that just doesn't seem worthwhile. So that was
It's
that.
a pretty fucked up thing to afflict on your character. Is also reflective of Matt Stone and Trey Parker's sense of offensive humor, and
Yeah.
the fact that you can't get rid of it is it's something else.
Yeah.
I got it towards the end of the game, so it wasn't that big of a deal. But it is that's a
Yeah.
game. That's a video game.
So you finished that. You were also playing through Yoshi's Island, which
New
you also
Island.
reviewed. Yeah, Yoshi's New Island for the
Oh,
3DS.
the chat is saying there's a cure in Canada.
Oh, is there? Okay. The doctors in Canada, right? Because Canada has a better health care system than America. That would make sense. That's a good joke.
That's pretty good. Well,
Yeah.
I got out of Canada as soon as I could, so I wasn't sticking around that place. And yeah, so I was playing Yoshi's New Island this week, which there's a review up on the site in which I gave the game 3 stars because it's not bad, but it's not by Nintendo platforming standards, especially some of the ones they've produced recently, both internally over in Japan and over at Retro with Donkey Kong. It's a disappointment. I didn't expect that this was going to be hardcore on the level of Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, which
Sure.
from the very get-go is, hey, this is a balls hard platformer. If you've played a lot of these, you're going to enjoy this, but we're going to kick your ass from the moment this game begins and never let up. That's what Donkey Kong is. Didn't expect that from Yoshi's New Island. I expected sort of the arc that we've been seeing in a lot of Mario games, especially the 3D World and 3D Land, in which you play like the first 4 worlds, in which it's not fun, but they're pretty easy. Like you're enjoying the mechanics and discovering things of the world, but you're not being challenged too much. And then at some point the game says, look, we're leaving all those other people behind. You come along with us on this journey. We're going to now kick your ass, and we're going to really challenge your ability to play this game and exploit the mechanics in order to not only complete the levels, but to find everything in them. And that does happen in Yoshi's New Island, but it only happens in the last world, and there are only 6 worlds. So the game is relatively short compared to other Nintendo platformers, which inherently, in and of itself is not that bad, but the fact that only the last world was the one where I was truly enjoying myself was both an unfortunate tease, because it really did feel like this team was capable of producing the game I was hoping for. They just either decided to or were asked to keep that all for the end game and not for the rest of it. So unfortunately, it's a game that's totally competent, well made, just pretty pedestrian and average, especially by Nintendo standards, and I hold them to a really high standard for games like this, especially if they're going to invoke Yoshi's Island, which is a game that, unlike that monster Jeff Gersman, I enjoy very much.
Yeah, and I don't know why you wouldn't, because Nintendo has the longest history of making really great platformers. I mean, they've made some pedestrian ones too, but they rarely make bad ones, and they make far more good ones than they make pedestrian ones. So I don't know. The thing with this game, though, is that it never seemed like Nintendo was ever that excited about it. Like, they would talk about it, and it's like, hey, cool, we're making another Yoshi's Island thing. But it always seemed like to be kind of an afterthought in every bit of promotion they did for their Nintendo Directs and other sort of promotional events. And it never seemed like a game they had a hell of a lot of confidence in. And it seems like maybe that kind of shows in the final product, where it's just sort of like, here's this game, it's pretty cute, it's fun, and really only that interesting in the last level.
Yeah, and if this is meant to be targeted at kids, then I actually think this would be a great platform for kids. Like I think it has a pretty easy skill arc. It's not very challenging. I think by the end I had something like 150 lives. Like I think the only times I really died in the game, with the exception of like once or twice, was when I was purposely dying in order to go back through a section and try and collect all the red coins or the flowers, things that I had missed on my way through a certain section. It is not a game that, even in the final world where it does become challenging, I wasn't really dying, but what the game was requiring me to do was to really take into account the flying physics and how the the eggs can be shot around the world, not just to collect things, but just to progress. And it really forced you to juggle a lot of things at once, which was really enjoyable. And when it happened, I had this moment of like, well, I'm finishing this on like Wednesday night. I have to, or Tuesday night. I have to review this on Wednesday because the embargo's up on Thursday morning. I was like, oh shit! Like if this game has 6 more worlds, I am not in a comfortable position to finish all of those in time to also write the review. And as it turned out, there isn't another set of 6 worlds.
Right.
I was kind of hoping the game was going to be a scenario of, all right, hey, here's this last world. You're going to get a bunch of this real soon. Get excited. There's none of that. There are secret stages, and secret stages in Yoshi's Island were some of the more challenging, fun ones, but it does require you to collect everything in every single stage of a world, and there are 3 collectibles in each stage in Yoshi's Island, and this is true of Yoshi's New Island. You are collecting little stars that count down when you've been touched by an enemy and Baby Mario is off screaming. You have red coins, and you have flowers, and those are all unlocked in different ways, and you have to collect all of those in a particular world to get the secret stage. I was unable to find everything in 1-2, so I just sort of gave up on this notion of finding everything. But that is the one thing that Yoshi's New Island gets pretty right, is that if you in Yoshi's Island, which is also not a particularly challenging game, except in certain stages and later on, but it has a real sense of exploration in which if you just go from left to right and just see what the game is offering on sort of the path to the exit, you're going to be missing out on a lot of what makes the level design in that original game and also in this new game more interesting than your average platformer, because they are hiding objects around the world that either require you to use the egg shots in interesting ways or require you to physically move your character over a spot in the world, which will then unlock a little cloud that you can shoot. So if you're just going left to right, you're going to miss out on what the designers have hidden. It's done more interestingly in Yoshi's Island than it is in Yoshi's New Island, but they do get closer to nailing that aspect, which is something I enjoyed in Yoshi's Island and is present in the new game. But it's, and then on top of all, it's just not very good to look at. It really feels. I think the line I used in my review was like an adult chasing after the recklessness of his youth. Yoshi's Island is a inspired, reactionary visual style that was purposely done and chased after by Miyamoto because of what was happening at Rare with Donkey Kong Country and the CG that was sort of present in those games at the end of the SNES's life cycle. And this game looks like Yoshi's Island, but when you look at screenshots and video of Yoshi's Island, it's very clear that it has a very clear art direction, and this one is just sort of I don't know, it kind of looks like crayons and sketchy stuff.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work very well.
Yeah, someone I saw described it as looking like a bad CD-ROM game from the early to mid-90s, and that description has stuck with me kind of forever. I can't not look at it and go, God, that looks like a horrible CDI game or something. It's too bad because I like you. I'm on team original Yoshi's Island. I still think that game is pretty great. Though the one thing in your review I would like to take umbrage with is the notion that nobody liked Yoshi's Island for the DS. Because there are actually some extremely passionate vocal people who love the shit out of the game, including GameSpot's former writer Frank Provo, who gave that game a 9.
That's fine.
Jeff tried to yell at him down to get that score down, but he would not budge on that one.
You know what? I did not care for it. I thought it was pretty average and not. I thought the dual screen stuff was interesting. I thought they were definitely playing with some interesting mechanics there. Didn't click for me, but I don't. These people, they're cropping up being like, "Hey man, Yoshi's story was pretty good." Who are you?
I don't. Those people I don't understand at all.
Yeah, even I can't get on board with that, you guys. I will say, the vast majority of those people seem to caveat their opinions well, when I played it when I was 7, it was pretty good, so I don't know why you're getting all up on Yoshi's Story's case. Hey, maybe go back and play that. I went back and played Yoshi's Island. I went back with fresh eyes, and that game is still killer.
Yeah.
Yoshi's Story is a blurry. It's got some interesting ideas. It's got a branching path idea to level design, in which high scores determine how you get to different stages, like that's cool. Like I think that's an interesting idea, but ah
If I had
Yoshi's
a nickel,
Story.
if I had a nickel for every game I thought was great when I was 7 that turned out not to be so great when I was way older than 7, I would have at least several $100s. That you can't go by that kind of nostalgia. You can't trust that kind of nostalgia because it will lie to you, it will deceive you, it will make you think things that are not true, like the idea that Yoshi's Story is somehow a worthwhile game.
Yoshi's Story. I
No,
remember being
no.
God, that was one of the worst purchases I made as a kid because, man, I beat that game in like an hour, and it was really depressing.
Yeah.
I
Ugh.
mean, I don't think as a kid I quite understood the mechanics. Later I've looked it up and played it and decided that I don't care for it.
Hmm.
But yeah, man, that was a real bummer of a game at the time. My mom was not very happy with my spending of my $60, or actually that game was probably much more than $60 at the time. Yoshi's Story was probably some N64 games were like $80 or $90.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
I
Yeah,
can't
the
remember.
pricing was not fixed for a lot of those cartridge-based games. Like it seemed to have a lot to do with like how much RAM they tried to jam into each cartridge, or sometimes it seemed totally arbitrary. There were at least a couple of games I remember that were like $100,
Yeah.
and that was nuts.
So yeah, so that's Yoshi's New Island. There's, it's not like I said, it's not terrible.
Yeah,
But it's not great. I enjoyed my time with it, but in terms of being, a proper sequel to Yoshi's Island, it feels like it takes inspiration without knowing what to do with it. It has a lot of the elements of Yoshi's Island without really. It just feels like, hey, we got to have this in here, right? Of
yeah,
course, they don't even put in Touch Fuzzy Get Dizzy, which would be like, duh, for
yeah,
a sequel in 3D. Like, that could look incredible in 3D. Maybe it's a secret stage, but it's not in one of the normal stages, and that bummed me out. And yeah, I just feel they have all these different elements. You're like, oh yeah, I remember that, and then it disappears. They don't layer the mechanics in a way that feels interesting, nor does it feel like they are put there for any other reason than to just be like, yep, that's there too. It's not there because they were like, oh, we want to do this and this and this with it. It feels very much a Me Too sort of game, in which, they're it's a bad cover song.
yeah.
And it's you enjoy the song because on some level the song you like is there, but it's being played very poorly. And that's kind of how I feel about Yoshi's New Island. So bums
That
me
is a
out.
bummer.
It is definitely a bummer. It's not something I'd recommend people run out and purchase. Maybe if there's a sale on Ye Ol' eShop, it might be worth checking out down the line. But you know what? You should probably just go play Mario 3D Land again because that is a terrific game. And Yoshi's New Island, eh, probably
Not
not
so
worth
much.
your time.
Well,
Um,
that's a bummer.
so yeah, I finished that, played that. Don't intend to look back on that again. And like I said, I've played 90 minutes of Dark Souls 2.
Hmm.
I managed to fall off like the first ledge in the game because I rolled in the wrong direction and
Good,
got.
good work, Patrick.
I mean, it's great. If you haven't played Dark Souls 2 yet, I don't want to spoil what the first achievement or trophy unlock is, but let's just say it's related to doing something dumb like that. It's pretty great. And so I played through basically the opening area. There's a tutorial section that you can skip if you just run straight, and then you can go through the first real area of the game. But I went ahead and went through the tutorial mostly because it's been like 2 months since I played Dark Souls 1. In Dark Souls 1, I played on the PC with an Xbox controller, and I'm having a hard time adjusting to the PS3 controller. I don't like the PS3 controller at all. I
Hmm.
really, really dislike the PS3 controller. I like the PS4 controller a lot more, and you can use that, and apparently it works perfect with Dark Souls 2, but the PS4 controller doesn't work wirelessly over a PS3, which is not a
Uh,
big surprise, which means I need to get a USB extender, which I don't own, for the controller because my PS4 or PS3 is hooked up to the TV, which is a pretty far distance from where I'm sitting comfortably on my couch to play the game. So I ordered a USB extender over Amazon that'll get here when I'm back from GDC, so I can use the PS4 controller, which is a much, much better controller
Yes, it
than
is.
that. And I know there are solutions to using the 360 controller on the PS3, which I guess I could explore if I wanted to, but I think I'm actually just going to try and stick with the PS4 controller because I do even prefer that to the Xbox One controller. So I'm going to get
Yeah,
a USB cord and get set up for that. But yeah, probably the
Dark
first
Souls.
thing I'd say about Dark Souls 2 is that I kind of wish I was playing the PC version. It
Sure.
doesn't look bad, but I played through Dark Souls 1 on the PC, which looked fan-frickin-tastic because the art style in those games is wonderful, and they seem mostly held back by From Software's technical constraints on their end to display those. And naturally, the PC and the resolution makes that art pop in a way that doesn't come across on the consoles. And yeah, the PS3 version, like right out of the gate, like just has like some real serious frame rate issues, which I know everyone experienced when they played Dark Souls on the consoles. Both 360 and PS3 had frame rate issues, but after playing the PC version, which I played not with the 60 frames per second trick unlocked because that destroys some of the physics of the game. I stuck to kind of a solid 30, but man, it was ultra smooth, looked great, and really am tempted to wait for the PC version, but I don't think I'm going to do that. I'm going to try and continue to play the PS3 version of the game.
Don't think about it
And
as being bummed by how bad it looks on, current gen hardware or whatever, for Dark Souls 2. Think about how great the Dark Souls 3 is going to look on next gen or current gen hardware. Like just think in the future, and that maybe that'll take some of the sting off.
yeah, well, it's a really weird feeling when I'm playing Dark Souls 2 and like if you point the camera at the ground and you
Hmm.
spin it around, it's 60 frames a second. and then you tilt it up and it's like chunk 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 chunk. It's
Right.
really only like teens frame rate in like certain sections, but it's kind of a bummer, but I'm over it. I will adjust to it. I really want to play the game. I don't want to wait. And I haven't made it to the first major boss, but I love that if you're going through the tutorial section, you encounter your first enemy, and then the game, he's already really tough. I wasn't really equipped for him. Like I had to do a lot of running around and shooting my arrows because I'm kind of currently playing a sort of ranged class that has an axe up front, but then also is able to attack with arrows from a distance. And then, of course, the game has secretly hiding another one of those enemies right behind you who just came from behind and smacked the shit out of me.
Jesus
Uh,
Christ.
so it was very much like, yep, this is Dark Souls. I'm looking forward to exploring more of it, but part of the reason I wanted to finish South Park was because Dark Souls is not a game you can really split your time on.
Yeah.
And if I finish South Park, that means when I come back from GDC, although I am tempted to bring my PS3 with me to San Francisco because I'm probably going to be, most hotels these days have nice HDTVs, and I'm probably not doing anything on Saturday night when I get there. I'm tempted to bring it with me, but that seems stupid. That seems
For one night,
ridiculous.
too. I mean, you're gonna spend most of those nights. You're gonna have things going on. You're not gonna
Right,
have
and
a
I'm
shit
probably
ton
going to
of
end up
time.
doing something on Saturday night, even though I'm like trying to stay inside and be well rested for my talk on Sunday. But I'm like, really excited to play it, and um,
Just think how
I'm
much more excited you'll be when you get back, because you'll have that intense like desire through the entire week of GDC, that thing pulling at you that like, God damn it, I just wish I was playing this right now. You'll be in the office where probably Brad will be playing it at some point, and you'll be super pissed that you aren't playing it.
yeah.
And then when you get home, you'll be really excited.
Yeah. So yeah, I get home on Friday night, and I plan to basically spend my entire weekend playing that, and
Good.
considering taking Monday off because it'll be a long week, and I'm going to need a break. So maybe I'll do that and dig into that game. But yeah, so wish I had more to say about Dark Souls 2, but I'm excited to play it, and I'll have more to say a week from now. But unfortunately, South Park took precedent while Yoshi's New Island took my other free time. But at least I feel like I'm keeping pace. I feel like
Yeah.
I'm not falling behind too much with the games I really want to spend time with. Like Titanfall, it's always going to be there, and it's a multiplayer game, so I'm not too worried about. I can get back to that at any point, and I'll feel okay about that. And
What if
I do want to
Titanfall
play.
isn't there? What if it's not there tomorrow? What if it
I
just
guess
goes away? What if Titanfall disappears? What if it dies?
It's possible.
You cannot rely on things to just always be there. You never know what might happen.
It's true. It's true. And then I'll be back just in time for Infamous Second Son, which I hope that's good.
I do too.
I liked the first game more than the second game, I think.
I think that's a lot of people.
I'm trying to
feel that
remember
way.
my
I
thoughts
remember.
on the Infamous games, but
Yeah.
I did generally like those games, and the new one looks visually incredible. So I'm looking forward to playing that. So
Cool.
that's what I've been doing this week. It is already 10:20. We've been playing a lot of games this week. Why don't we? People want to drop some questions in. We'll address some of those as we wind towards the end of the show, and as we talk about some news.
Mm-hmm.
There's a new Crazy Taxi out for iOS.
Why?
Crazy Taxi City Rush, free to play. But Kenji Kano, who created the original arcade game, is the executive producer on this. So maybe
Have you tried to play Crazy Taxi at all in like the last 8 years?
it's probably not great outside of an arcade set. I don't think that game was ever all that great outside of an arcade setting. Like I
No.
enjoyed the Xbox version and the Dreamcast
The
version.
Dreamcast version was the one
That
I played. Yeah.
they put out, but Crazy Taxi, like the concept, just doesn't really work outside of like putting in another quarter, and at least it didn't for me. It didn't really hold up that much outside of the Dreamcast version. Like that was like the one and done. Like I loved that game so much that I was willing to invest time, and I was into The Offspring at the time, so it didn't matter that that's what you were listening to on the soundtrack most of the time.
Yep.
But like I don't know. I've never really felt like I needed to play another Crazy Taxi, and I have to assume the controls for this are tilt, which maybe that can work, but I don't know. That sounds bad.
Yeah, I don't know. That's one of those games that definitely it was perfect for its time because it came on the Dreamcast right at the beginning when it needed games, and it was something that was definitely amusing before other games came to that system. But yeah, outside of an arcade, there's really not much point to Crazy Taxi, and I'm sure maybe the iOS version makes some tweaks to try and make it more palatable, but that is not one of those franchises that I've had any desire to revisit in the last 7 or 8 years.
No. Ritsky Brat points out in the chat that the iOS port of the original game is free today, so I guess if you want to play that, you can. I don't know if that's a good version of the game, but
someone says, let's just agree that Crazy Taxi is one of the best games ever and let them talk. You're lying. You were lying to yourself.
It's a good game, though. It's a really good game. It mostly just makes me bummed about... Sega seems to be kind of turning themselves around a little bit. They seem to be kind of figuring out their way in the modern era. But, man, Sega made a lot of kick-ass video games back during that time.
They did. They made some good stuff.
Where is my new, decent Jet Set radio?
That's
God
a fair
damn it.
point. Campo Santo announced what their first game is going to be. Firewatch.
Yeah,
So,
Firewatch. Which
is a first-person exploration type game with a mystery attached where you play a character who is one of those dudes in those fire control towers in the vast stretches of wilderness. This case, Wyoming, which is not a setting you see done in games very often.
No, but apparently Nels Anderson, who's the lead designer on Mark of the Ninja, and Sean Vanneman, who was a co-lead on The Walking Dead Season 1 and is one of the leads on this new game, Firewatch. They both grew up or spent significant time in Wyoming. So I think that is part of why they are drawing inspiration from that. Or maybe it was Jake Rocket. I don't know. But there's Wyoming blood in Campo Santo, which I think explains why they're visiting a pretty unique
I went to
setting.
elementary school with Jake, so that is
okay.
He did not grow up in Wyoming.
You're right. I always forget that. So I think that's Sean then. But that's I'm surprised it's first person. I'll say that. I wouldn't have been shocked if the game ended up looking quite a bit like a Telltale adventure game.
Sure.
But I had no idea what exactly they were going for. But I'm sort of genuinely surprised it's first person. But I think that's interesting. Not surprised that they're going for a narrative-focused game. But I am going to be curious to see. Nels Anderson is a guy who comes from more of a systems background. Mark of the Ninja has a lot of intricate mechanics that play along each other. AI and combat. And does that mean this game is going to have any of that stuff? Is this game going to be just dialogue and conversation and exploration? I don't know. It's really too early to say, and they've said on their website that they're being purposely vague about more elements of the game, partially because it's a mystery,
Right.
so they want to maintain a sense of that for the story. But I am definitely super curious to learn more about what they're planning mechanically in terms of what they're going to allow the player to do, because you have to assume it mentions on the website that it's been a dry season. So you have to imagine a major conflict is going to be fire, and so I wonder if there are actually going to be systemic design elements that involve you, making some harsh choices about how you decide to tackle dealing with this fire.
And they talk a little bit about how there's your only communication with the outside world is this radio voice, this woman that you talk to, and I guess like some of the choices you have to make like directly impact your relationship and how you interact with her throughout the game. So that seems, I don't know, like I don't know exactly how the fire stuff is going to work, but it makes it sound like the description of the game on the page makes it sound like it's a little bit more mysterious, and like there's like a whole abandoned town element to it. So I get the impression it's going to be a lot of different things kind of mixing in there, not just about like some arsonist running around setting fires.
Yeah, so we'll see. Not a lot to say about the game yet, but the talent involved makes me very excited to see what they do. And the idea of an entire video game with art by Ali Moss.
Oh, hell yeah.
I think it was, there was someone on Twitter saying, like, that's OP. That's just too much. Yep. The fact that you got Ali Moss doing all your art is ridiculous. And
even just like the little tidbits they've shown look really cool. So I'm very excited for that one.
Yeah. So we're looking. It sounds like we'll probably have those guys floating around for some GDC stuff as well.
Cool.
So we'll see what we can extract from them about Firewatch. But they've said it's coming out next year sometime. It's coming out for PC, Mac, and Linux. And they're looking at consoles, but they're a small team, so I wouldn't be surprised if they kind of follow the Gone Home route of coming out, making their mark, hopefully a good one, on the PC side, and then partnering up with someone to put that game out on consoles at a later date. But
yeah, that would make sense.
We'll see. I'm excited to see what else they do. They could probably sell all the wallpaper in that game as posters. I expect.
Yeah, I would think so.
If the game turns out to be terrible, I guess their backup business model is to just sell the game's art as posters.
Yeah, that's not a bad backup plan. You saw the T-shirt that they put up in their merch store that's just video games with the combination of the Mountain Dew and Doritos logos. Yes.
Yep, that's pretty good. And they already sold out of their first poster.
Of course they did.
That went up alongside the website, but they had put out an Ollie Moss Firewatch, sort of like advertising the group that you can be a part of. It was sort of like a marketing thing. And that's, of course, already sold out because Ollie Moss stuff always sells out.
Yep. Speaking of first-person walking simulators, Gone Home is coming to consoles thanks to publisher Midnight City. Do I recall that correctly?
That is correct. That's correct. Yeah, they're bringing Gone Home to consoles, and what was the other thing they announced this week?
Costume Quest 2.
Yeah, right. Which I really liked Costume Quest.
I did too. I reviewed it. I enjoyed that game a lot. It had a really cool, like, when you're talking about games for kids, sure, like, yeah, that was definitely like a game that was, simplified in a lot of ways, sort of a my first RPG kind of way. But that was that game had an incredible, like, childish spirit to it, like the whole candy collection thing, and just sort of like the crazy imaginary characters that the kids would dream up to fight with. Like that game was super, super cute in a way that I really adored, even if it was pretty, the combat could get pretty simple and repetitive. So I'm very excited to see what they would do with that.
That's the part that I hope is where a lot of the thought is going into Costume Quest 2. Is the first one was exceedingly charming. It was one of the first games that I got all of the achievements for. Like, I just didn't want to leave.
Yeah.
Like that little world. And the DLC was great too. They put out a little story DLC. I got everything in that as well. I just really, really enjoyed wandering around. But and the combat was, perfectly serviceable, but like in the ways that, like, South Park, like, you could just kind of exploit certain parts of the combat mechanics and just sort of coast through the end of it. Like in South Park, like speed potions. Like the ability to give yourself the chance to attack twice so that you become a bleeding X5 on every character. Just like, well, just don't die and they'll bleed themselves to death in a couple of rounds. Costume Quest just the game kind of rolled over and actually just didn't have a whole lot for you to do mechanically
Right.
speaking. With the combat. So I'm hoping, I don't expect them to turn it into a really complicated RPG, but I just hope there's a little more variety to make that part of the game more exciting.
Yeah, it just needs more attacks, more things that you can do in combat to sort of, and obviously enemies that maybe require a little bit more strategy than just, spamming the same attacks again and again. That would definitely go a long way to curing any ails that first game had. But, regardless, like just another, even if it does end up just being kind of the same thing again, like that'll be disappointing. But I'm willing and ready to revisit that world again because I thought it was so adorable, and those two kids were so cute, and the whole just the whole premise of the game was really great. And I'm ready to try that again, and hopefully they will flesh it out a little bit more this time.
Yeah, I think it's a terrific game for them to make a sequel to. I think it is of those games they're making in sort of that era of Double Fine, it is the most ripe for a sequel.
Yep.
There's just a lot of stuff when you played that game that was like, okay, I can see how they would definitely approach this a second time. I don't know if the sequel is going to be more ambitious or if it's going to be as sort of focused in scope. I don't need it to be an epic RPG experience. I think, like you said, they could kind of do the same thing, and I'd probably be pretty okay with it. But I'd really love to see if they added just pure variety to the combat in some way. So
totally.
I'm excited they're making Costume Quest 2.
Same.
That is a super exciting development, and basically one of the last things I expected to hear.
Totally.
That's not a game I expected to see a sequel to, and that's cool. I'm actually talking to Casey Lynch, who is sort of the creative head of Midnight City and a former games writer. And he was heading up IGN, I think, as their EIC for a little while there, but now he's doing Midnight City. So I booked some time with him, and we'll be chatting about what they're up to at GDC sometime. So
also
look
a
forward
former
to that.
PR executive at Reverb Communications.
He's done kind of everything.
Yeah, he has. But he's also one of the best, so good. I'm glad to see him working on cool stuff.
So, I mean, as shown by the fact that he's spending his money to fund a game like Costume Quest 2.
Yeah, totally.
That's, as soon as I saw that pushed me over the edge. I was like, all right, I need to see what this madman is up to, spending all this money on games like Costume Quest 2.
Absolutely, and hopefully this eventually leads to Stacking 2, because that's the one I'm actually also super hopeful for at some point.
Yeah, that could definitely be something that would make sense too. Shovel Knight pushed back a couple of weeks. Sounds like the game is basically done, but they mentioned that in order to launch the game on everything at once, there are more logistical hurdles in terms of basically paperwork and other BS that comes alongside publishing things on platforms that aren't Steam. So that's coming a little bit later in April. I'm not too bummed about that.
No.
April was not as packed as March, and that just gives me some breathing room because Shovel Knight's definitely a game that I want to play. So it coming out in April is not a bad thing by my estimation.
No, it's a slight delay at best, and that's totally fine. Slightly more disappointing was the news that The Witcher 3 is now delayed to February 2015. That always seemed a little bit dicey as a 2014 release because for what they showed at E3 last year, they haven't really shown a whole lot of it since then. So I guess that's not horribly surprising. It is kind of a bummer, though, because that is definitely one of the games I have been most looking forward to since I first got my first glimpse of it. Again, that E3 demo they showed was pretty fucking incredible. And, as someone who has tried and periodically failed, mostly failed actually, to get into the previous Witcher games, this seemed like one that I might finally be able to kind of dig into, and unfortunately we're going to have to wait until February to do it, which sucks.
It seems to make more sense for a lot of reasons, even if the game could have shipped this fall. The Witcher, while I played The Witcher 2, loved it, great game, great game. I've been meaning to go back to The Witcher 1 at some point just to kind of flesh out the lore for myself, but it's not a heavy hitter in that way. And that coming out in a fall rush, this October we're going to have Batman Arkham Knight. We're going to have a lot of big games coming out this fall. It's going to be the first real big push for Christmas on next-gen consoles, or I guess current-gen. I don't when I don't know when I'm going to be comfortable switching my vernacular there, but February. There's not going to be a lot coming out then, like especially
No.
like a big AAA RPG. Like people are going to be out of their backlog. Like they're putting a big stake in the ground. Games are going to get out of the way of The Witcher. So I think February makes a ton of sense for them.
Sure.
It'll give that game more time for polish, which isn't a bad thing. And I think it kind of clears the space for them in a way that wouldn't have happened in the fall. So I think it makes a ton of sense for them to be in early 2015, even if it's disappointing that it's not coming out this year because,
Yeah.
like you, I was really looking forward to it. The idea of the Witcher developers tackling a Skyrim-style open-world RPG sounds awesome,
Yeah.
especially because combat is by far the weakest element in the Elder Scrolls series, and a game that tries to have some of that open-world nature with like really good, fun, dynamic combat sounds really good.
Yeah, and again, that demo looked amazing, and I'm hopeful that they are able to retain that in the final product because it was super impressive. But yeah, like you said, I mean, it's if it makes the game better and it makes them able to actually pull off their vision much better, then this is obviously for the best. It is just my personal disappointment that I will not be playing it sooner rather than later.
Yep, that is definitely disappointing for sure. I think that covers most of the major
Yeah.
news. And Smash Brothers is going to be at Evo, which means Nintendo signed off on it. Sounds like they're still working out the streaming stuff, which running theory is that has to do with IP rights that Nintendo needs to clear because of some of the characters in that game.
Sure.
Hopefully they figure that out. It's unfortunate that, the people still love that game, Nintendo. Figure it out. Find a way for people to play that and love your games in a way that is basically free marketing.
Yeah, don't do things that make it harder for people to enjoy your games. That is literally the worst thing you can do right now, especially given the current precarious nation of some of their console business.
Yep. Lead Haxer asks, thoughts on Drive Club? Will that game ever come out?
You know, a while ago, like even just a few weeks ago, I might have said, "Oh, that's an overly reactionary question. That doesn't, that game will probably come out." But I don't know. The way they're talking about it now, and the way they're saying they needed to start a bunch of stuff over, and that they don't have a release date for it at this point, and they kind of don't know. I don't know. Maybe that game won't come out, which would be kind of a bummer. But at the same time, they've never really shown enough of it for me to ever get a super great impression of how well it will play. The few times I have gotten my hands on it, the driving wasn't that great. So I can understand their desire to maybe start over with some of that stuff. But I don't know. We'll see if the cost reward thing kind of skews in a particular way in the next few months. Because if they're not talking about that game at E3, that's a real bad sign.
Yeah, I just don't know how we go from it felt, we're gonna get a PlayStation Plus version of the game that can then turn into the full game at launch to an early 2014 game to we're starting from scratch.
Yeah.
That's really strange. I mean, obviously, the fact that they're willing to go, whatever back to the drawing board means, if they're willing to give that game the time to be a good game, that's awesome. Maybe the fact that PS4 is selling as well as it is gave them the confidence to say, look, we could put this out just so we've got another game out there. But you know what? The machine's selling well. People are excited about buying the console. Why not give that game the time it needs in order to be a good game rather than just getting it out to fill a hole in the schedule? That's the most positive way to look at that. But if that is the case, that's nice. Like the fact that they would give that game the time to breathe and become the good game that it potentially could. I don't care about that game one way or the other. I just don't really play racing games. But for people who are interested in those, that seems like that's maybe a good way for that to end up.
Yeah, I mean, I am definitely the audience for that game. I like, drivey, vroom, vroom games, and that is, some of the ideas they were talking about with some of the car club stuff and whatever all sounded, totally up my alley. But nothing of what I've actually played of it and what I've seen of it has super impressed me, and so them going back to the drawing board or whatever, at least gives me some hope that they realized that game was not good and that they have to do something. I just know that whenever games like that when they get that far in their development cycle and suddenly are back to the drawing board, that's how you end up with shit like This Is Vegas or whatever, things that are announced and maybe shown here and there, and it's like, oh hey, cool, that never existed. That just never came to fruition. So I'm hoping it doesn't end up like that. But
This is Vegas.
Yeah, remember This Is Vegas? Remember that game?
Someone needs to leak a build of that game.
Yeah.
Gross.
Never gonna happen.
Those posers ask, did you guys see the NPD numbers? Do you care about them or think they matter? I saw them. No, I don't care. Yes, they probably matter.
I mean, they matter to people who are in the business side of things and need these numbers to sort of justify, one decision or another, or just to help, bolster investors or whatever. But in this case, does it matter that the Xbox One made slightly more money than the PS4 but sold fairly similar numbers of consoles? Not really. I mean, it's just the only thing that you can take away from those numbers is that, hey, consoles are selling, so that's a good thing. There still probably need to be more games for both those systems, but at least the systems are selling, so that's something. That's a bit of positive news, right?
Yeah. I getting caught up in the monthly NPD game is not something I find particularly interesting.
Right.
So, yes, of course they matter. Sales matter. You need sales for all this to work. But in terms of us, hand-wringing too much over the month-to-month sales of these consoles, So that's gonna do it for us. What are you gonna play this weekend? More Titanfall?
Oh yeah, more Titanfall, and then as the panels for PAX East were announced this past week, you might have noticed that I am on a panel on Sunday morning in which myself and 29 other various people that you may have heard of, including our own Jeff Gerstmann, will be participating in an N64 wrestling game Royal Rumble for the delight of the crowd. And so I've already started digging through those games and started practicing to make sure that I am the supreme champion of all things Royal Rumble come PAX East. So
it's a great idea for a panel. Genius. I was laughing my ass off when I saw just the concept, and it's perfect for PAX. Like the idea of a bunch of industry idiots getting together to play. Do you know which version of the game you're playing? Is it No Mercy?
So this is all Aaron Treitz from Harmonix is doing. This was his baby. This is his project, and he is the one managing all of this stuff. He has not said for sure what game it's going to be yet. He said he will let us know sometime beforehand, but that he is still figuring it out. So I have already dug out WCW Revenge, WrestleMania 2000, and No Mercy, and I've already been playing all three of them just in case it's one that I don't suspect, and so I'm versed in all of them. That's the kind of stupid and ridiculous I'm getting about this. I am going to take it so seriously.
It's got to be Revenge or No Mercy, right? It can't be. Why would you choose a different one?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. If you chose WrestleMania 2000, it's because probably the Royal Rumble mechanics in that one are better than the other two. There's some weird design choices in some of those games where the battle royals don't work as well. I don't know
Is
why.
WrestleMania 2000 mechanically similar to?
Yeah, it's the same. It's the Aki.
All right. Okay. So it's
all the Aki wrestling games. So
it's all you got an N64 controller and you have to move your freaking palm around the analog stick to get out of a grapple.
Yep. Yeah, it's not going to be like WWF Warzone or fucking WCW Backstage Brawl or some bullshit. That's not going to happen. So
I guess I didn't play WrestleMania 2000. I played a lot of Revenge and No Mercy though.
Yeah,
it'll be a lot of time in the custom creator section.
Yeah, we'll make. Did you make one of yourself? Did you make your own wrestler that was a little Patrick?
I think we were often bringing in wrestlers from the WWF and stuff like that.
Sure.
The merger happened.
Makes sense. But that's going to be a chunk of my weekend is continuing to rehearse for all of that, and I don't know, maybe at some point I'll cut a dumb promo video or something for the internet.
Yep, that sounds really great.
Has already done that, so I've already got a bar to cross, so we'll see.
Yeah, so that sounds really excited. I'll be there. I'm not participating in the Royal Rumble, but I'll be mocking those participating.
As you should.
I am on, where the Giant Bomb panel is on Saturday night at 9
o'clock.
9 o'clock, which I think is the latest we've done one of these. And then I have a panel on Friday, I think 4 o'clock with Zoe Quinn, in which we'll be talking about internet commentary and abuse and, with a focus on how people can help to help others cope with stuff like that, and then to think about the way you conduct yourself on the internet. It's kind of an adapted version of the TEDx talk I gave, and then Zoe will be talking about sort of her experience trying to get Depression Quest on Steam Greenlight, which is full of horrible, horrible stories, of which some will be shared at PAX East. But that's pretty soon. That's like a month from now, or if not a little less. I should probably book a flight or think about booking a flight
Not a bad
to
idea.
go out there. But
I'm gonna
that
drive.
Are you really?
Yeah.
That sounds pretty good.
Why not? I mean, it's like a 3-hour drive or 3.5-hour drive from New York. So, I mean, might as well.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Don't you
Yeah.
normally take a train?
Normally I take a train. I felt like driving. I'm going to drive.
Okay. Fair enough. Well, that's going to do it for Bombin the Ant with Scoops and the Wolf. We will not be back next Monday or Friday, but we'll see how my GDC schedule works out. Maybe we'll try and find some time to do a live check-in during GDC. But obviously at night, we are going to have some GDC shows, I think on Wednesday and Thursday is the current plan. And then I will probably try and be on the podcast as well. But I have a pretty busy schedule the early part of next week, doing a bunch of interviews, so you can look forward to all sorts of dump trucking next week, in addition to whatever else we manage to see and to play. So follow my Twitter feed for some more updates on things like that. But other than that, Alex, I will not see you in San Francisco, so I will see you here again in like a week and a half.
Best of luck at the show. Hope you have a good time. And as always, oh.